I can remember the first time that I ever heard a song on the radio. It was probably '81, my first record.
After belting out his heart for more than 4 decades, George Strait is now confronting the toughest moment of his life. His wife, Norma, the love of his life for over half a century, has just been given a devastating diagnosis. And now, George may be walking away from all he loves, not because he wants to, but because he must. What transpired behind closed doors? And why is this farewell affecting fans so strongly? Stay tuned, because what we're about to tell you will make you view this country icon differently forever. How George and Norma's romance started. Prior to the awards, prior to the fame, prior to George Strait being a household name and country icon, he was merely a young man with aspirations and an emerging passion for a woman that he couldn't get out of his head. It all began when they were both teenagers in the small town of Big Wells, Texas. George had noticed Norma here and there, but really hadn't given it much thought at first. They lived in the same town, but not very frequently did their paths cross. And perhaps, just perhaps, George wasn't yet ready to jump into anything serious. Raised on his father's 200-acre cattle ranch, George spent weekends and summers working hard beside his dad, John Byron Strait Sr., a math teacher at a nearby junior high school. The ranch was his universe, and he was happy with that. There was always something serene about being out in the open fields, horseback riding, and tending to the cattle, and George did really enjoy that kind of lifestyle. But sometimes life had a way of surprising you. One day, George mustered up the courage to ask Norma out, and they went on their first date. He went on to call her hot, absolutely smitten with her looks. But even that initial connection didn't bring them together again for a while. Perhaps it was the allure of ranch life that pulled him away, or perhaps he wasn't ready to settle down just yet. Whatever the case, that first meeting didn't blossom into anything more, at least not immediately, anyway. When George was in elementary school, his parents divorced, which upset the family dynamics. His sister, Pincy, lived with their mother, while George and his brother, Buddy, remained with their dad on the ranch. Although George immersed himself in working hard and maturing at a young age, he couldn't get rid of the sense that something was lacking. It wasn't the work or the ranch living that was drawing him. It was the sense that perhaps he had left something undone. Months passed before he called Norma again, and this time, things felt different. They began dating in high school, and it was obvious that George was finally willing to put something into something real. But love was not the only thing he was thinking about. Along with the stable existence of a cowboy, something else began brewing within him. A deep passion for music, the discovery of country music. It wasn't country music forever that occupied George Strait's heart. As a teenager, he couldn't be further away from the Texas country music that would one day make him a household name. Rather, George was caught up in the rock and roll craze of the late 1960s. The British invasion was in full flight, and George was, like many a teenager of his day, in love with bands such as the Beatles. He even had a local band, the Stoics, whose music was heavily influenced by British rock idols. This was his reality for a while, the reality of electric guitars and breakneck rhythms. What's astonishing, however, is that while being brought up in Texas, which almost breathes country music, George wasn't interested in country music at all. He was so disconnected from the country scene that he didn't even play on the radio. Rather, he liked the Farmer's Report, a testament to his ranching heritage. Rock and roll was the music of his heart, and he went wherever it took him. But as life has a way of doing, something happened that would turn it all around for George. He ended up at a live country music performance one day. Something about the experience caught his attention. He couldn't get it out of his mind. And that was the turning point. After that, country music had him in its grip, and George started going deep into it. He began listening to the legends such as Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, Lefty Frizzell, and George Jones. The more he listened, the more he knew that country music was where he wanted to be. Now that he had developed this newfound love for country music, it looked as though George was set to leave his mark on the globe. However, that could not happen until he did something vital. After managing his on-again, off-again affair with Norma, the woman he loved, George stepped up. George and Norma eloped to Mexico and wedded on December 4th, 1971, immediately after high school. They had always been close, but now they were pushing their love to a new level. This wasn't only a wedding, it was a statement that they were in it for the long haul, no matter what. They came back later to Pearsall and did things the old-fashioned way, with a church wedding. But the first one? That was the beginning of their forever. But whereas their romance looked like something from a novel, tragedy waited in the wings. Something was to shake George and Norma to the foundations and alter everything forever. But for a time, they were basking in happiness, beginning their life together in harmony. A new chapter. George Strait and Norma's life together opened a new chapter after getting married. The marriage whirlwind came with love, enthusiasm, and difficulties, but they weathered them all together. George's love for music was still very much aglow, but with it, he also had a strong sense of responsibility to his nation. In 1971, when the moment had arrived to serve, George hesitated not. He joined the U.S. Army, taking on the shoes of an infantryman. He was assigned to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, far removed from his Texas beginnings, but the ideal. It was a chance for George to prove his worth. After George settled into his life in Hawaii, Norma, always the doting wife, followed. They established a life far away from Texas's ranchland George had grown up with, but one that felt like home. On October 6, 1972, the couple's life brightened even more with the birth of their daughter, Jennifer. Cradling his baby girl, George knew that his fantasies had actually materialized. He had his soulmate, a prospering family, and a stable base. There was still one thing lacking, though, something George always longed for: music. Even during his time as a soldier, George's soul remained rambling country in country songs. When he learned about an Army-financed band called Rambling Country, he leapt at the opportunity to try out. It was a little step, but an important one. He was accepted into the band, and they played on and off the bass, maintaining George's passion for music as he carried out his service as a serviceman. Music continued to be a part of his life, but stardom was Texas State University still out of reach. But as with any worthwhile path, George's was beset with surprising turns. In 1975, after exiting the Army as a corporal, George went back to Texas and enrolled at Texas State University to pursue a degree in agriculture. It all made sense, though. He'd spent his entire life working on the family cattle ranch. Music was still in his heart, but it looked like it was time for a new page. George never majored in music, though it was always his real passion. Though many would have settled into the more traditional route, George's journey was far from complete. One day, while he was on campus, George noticed an advertisement for a country band called Stony Ridge. They were seeking a new lead singer. Ace and the whole band George tried out without hesitation and became the lead singer immediately. He was no longer just a member of a group. He was influencing the sound of the band. With him as their new lead singer, George renamed the band to Ace and the Whole Band. The group played throughout Texas, primarily in small honky-donks and bars, but were starting to gain popularity. They were opening for well-known artists such as the Texas Playboys and Asleep at the Wheel. Their popularity in the region increased, and before long, D Records, an independent label based in Houston, gave them the opportunity to record some singles. It was a great opportunity, and George was determined to utilize it to the fullest. He composed the songs himself and gave his heart out in every note. But despite their efforts, the songs failed to catch the audience's attention. Frustration began to build, but in it all, Norma remained loyal to George, never faltering in support. Even when the songs didn't catch on, she kept reminding him of what they did have: love, family, and a steadfast faith in his ability. George never lost faith in music altogether. For a living, he continued working on his father's cattle ranch during the day. Though his enthusiasm for music hadn't diminished, dreams of making it big as a musician were further away than ever. But George wasn't the type of man to back down, particularly with Norma at his side. They kept plugging away, and George kept playing with Ace in the Hole, giving it all he had in each performance. Though there were setbacks, George never lost his passion for music, and this persistence would ultimately take him to his breakthrough. Rejection through his band shows, George was introduced to a Woolsey, a local manager with experience working with MCA Records. Woolsey started discussing George's ability with his industry insiders. While the reaction was overwhelmingly positive, there existed one glaring issue. Nobody could tell how George's music would be received by the larger country market. His sound was different. It was country traditional, but with a new spin. The record business simply wasn't certain where to put him. Rejection piled on rejection, but George didn't quit. He worked all the harder. He went to Nashville, the center of country music, hoping to get a record contract. But nothing panned out, no matter how hard he tried. Giving up on music, he was rejected by label after label, and he felt downhearted and uncertain about his future. When the rejections continued to mount, George started considering how he might support his family otherwise. Music wasn't panning out, so maybe it was time to set his aspirations aside. In this season of disappointment, George was approached with an offer to design cattle pens for a ranch. It wasn't the illustrious vocation he had envisioned, but it was stable employment, and it would provide for his family. George informed his band that he was leaving music, and for a second, it looked like his dreams were fading away. Norma was not going to let him quit, though. She knew George wasn't exactly excited about cattle pens, and she was not going to lose him to music. Norma sat down with George for a sit-down and talked him into giving music one more year. She informed him that she trusted him, that they had both given up too much for him to quit now. George did not want to hurt her. He loved her too much to disappoint her. So, he agreed for Unwound to give it one last try. It was a decision that worked out well for them, one that would forever alter their lives. In 1981, George finally got his big break when MCA Records signed him to a record deal. There was a catch, however. He got only one shot. If his first single went well, they'd think about recording an album. That one shot was all it took for George. With his band supporting him, George released Unwound as his first single. The song was a huge success, making it to number 6 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs list. It resulted in his debut album, Strait, solidifying his position as the hottest new country talent. George's music was a welcome return to vintage country, and it appealed to fans. His genuine cowboy persona, coupled with his new traditional sound, made Strait country a fast track to stardom for him. In 1982, he returned with his first #1 single, Foolhardy Memory, and his career simply continued to soar. But George's success did not end there. In 1983, he took over as headliner for the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo for Eddie Rabbitt, the latest record of achievement in his career. It appeared as though all things George touched became gold, and with every successive year, he gained more awards, more notice, and more affection from his audience. Throughout all, Norma was a constant rock. She decided to sacrifice her own career so that she could raise their kids, giving George the backbone he had to chase his aspirations. The two constructed a life that was both successful and loved.